welcome back to Math Time with Professor Prime, and I'm your host as always, Professor Prime. Let's talk about math and stand-up comedy. So I've done several videos on comedy in the past, like one major one, but then other ones that pertain to like more shows. But there's so many different elements of comedy, right? And so I wanted to talk about stand-up comedy because every now and then I'll watch a stand-up special, and yeah, you can't help but think about some things. So first and foremost, there's the idea of a joke in the first place, right? And then there are layers to the joke, but the idea is basically this, right? You have setup plus punchline equals joke, and you can play around with that formula. You can get some verses with it. You can add so many different things in the element, right? The setup could be elaborate. The punchline could be, well, it should be brief, but there are different ways you could classify that as elaborate. But my whole thing is like, right, that's a big part of it. So, but you could do more, right? So it's like there's math in telling jokes and the timing and what a joke is and how you get that across, right? And many different styles of comedy. And when you focus in on stand-up comedy, you have that basic idea of a joke and what that is and how that functions and how that flows, right? And that idea of a joke is mathematical, and then like the timing, right? But then there's so many added elements of doing stand-up because like you have the jokes that you construct and you're keeping an idea on not only the timing and the joke and the length of the joke, but also the length of whatever venue you may have. And then that's not all, right? Because there's math in the joke, there's math in designing the joke, but there's not just like a vocal component to that joke, right? You're moving around stage, so you got to be aware of your motion. And speaking of your motion, right? A lot of comedians that I've seen do stand up, it's like they're very animated, and a lot of times it's very deliberate. So it's like, and it may not sound like it, but all of it is mathematical, right? Just in the motion alone. But it's not just the motion, but what you're doing with it, right? Because you might have a comic do like a motion or a repeated motion, and they're keeping track of positions, right? Where they're at a stage, what their hands are doing, what they're doing and how frequently they're doing it, what they're trying to get across with the story, how they're timing that with elements of that joke. And then meanwhile, right, they're keeping track of the stage and how big it is and their position on the stage. And then you got to consider like the lighting, you got to consider the microphone and everything being set up to make them succeed with that. And of course, you have the audience and, thriving off of them and that energy and seeing where you go and just keeping track of time. And at the end of the day, it's all math, and I think that's cool. And it's just crazy to me because I one of the things I like about stand up, good stand up, is that you could tell a story in this just like cool way. Like, it could be laid back, it could be very exaggerated, but you're leading somewhere, you're taking people somewhere, and if you're really good, you're keeping track of what the audience is doing and you're noting that how much time you have and that they could interrupt. You may design it so you know you're working crowd work into that set, and that's worth considering. And then, of course, there's math and the money involved, right? Because a lot of times you're going out there and it's like, well, you're making some amount of money. You got to decide what's good. And sometimes people might just do things for the exposure, but it's like, it's nice to get paid and have that exposure. But my whole thing is just like, there's math and comedy, and I don't think that's too hard to see, but it's just interesting with stand-up comedy because it can be pretty specific and you have so many factors to consider, and I think that's pretty cool. And like I've seen some not so good stand-up, and that just like that makes me go eh. But I've seen some really good stand-up, and it's like yes, that. So anyway, I didn't want to make a super long video, but I wanted to talk about it a little bit. That being said, I'll see you in the future.